I'm going to bring you good news. It's dangerous because Jews don't want to hear good news. Jews, the great Abba Eban once said that the Jewish people is the only people in the world who refuse to take yes for an answer. You know, Jews want to hear that there's an impending catastrophe, that there's imminent crisis, that disaster is right around the corner. You know, the old Jewish telegram, you know, the Jewish, start worrying, details will follow, you know, because everybody wants to hear that, you know, if I give you a silver lining, you want to know that there's a cloud, right? That's a Jewish attitude. And I know what's going to happen. I'll speak for 15 or 20 minutes, and then you'll stop me and say, Rabbi, you're being naive. I know. But I think that you need to hear some good news. First of all, because there's so much bad news, and it's not good for your soul. And second of all, lose hope is to lose the basic connection with the Jewish faith. So I think it's so terribly important. And there's a bigger reason, because I'm also an educator by training. And if we don't tell our children a story of hope, they're going to abandon us simply because no one wants to be on a sinking ship. No one wants that attitude. So I want to bring you a story of hope tonight. And I do know all of the news. We talked earlier at dinner time. My brother lives in Herzliya and spends every afternoon in his mamad, in his safe room, you know. And I know what's going on in the world. There was a great historian of the last century named Simon Davidovich. He taught at Brandeis University, and he wrote a very famous essay called "The Ever-Dying People." And he pointed out, apropos of this idea of Jews in crisis, that every generation of Jews since the very beginning has worried that it's going to be the last. That every generation worried that its grandchildren will never take Judaism and Jewish life as seriously as our grandparents did. And every generation imagined that the next generations will simply dilute and abandon and be disloyal to this tradition. Every single generation. And he shows this. It's a marvelous essay, if you ever want to read it. And he shows this all through Jewish history. He brings all of these wonderful letters and these wonderful testimonies. But the thing that he points out is that an ever-dying people is also an ever-renewing people. That there is an energy within this faith, within this tradition, within this culture, which has the power of renewal built into it. If you're a believer, it's because God's not done with us yet. And if you're simply a sociologist, it's because there is an element of renewal. There's an element of cultural resilience and spiritual creativity built into the DNA of Jewish culture. And right now, we are at the precipice of a great crisis, but a crisis which I'm going to maintain tonight is not going to yield a break, but rather a rebirth, a renaissance, because that's what we do. Because when you look at the history of Jewish people, we have this amazing talent for renewal. We have this remarkable talent for renewal. Look, everyone, when we tell the story of Jewishness, when we tell the story of our culture, we typically tell it as a story of continuity. We like to think that we are part of a chain of generations going all the way back to antiquity. We like to look at Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Rachel and Leah and Moses and Aaron and David and Solomon, Isaiah and Jeremiah, and Hillel and Shammai and Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shmuel and Rav and Abaye. And we want to go into the medievals. We want to talk about Sadian, Rambam. Thank you. God bless you. Sadian, Rambam, and down to the Baal Shem Tov and down to Theodor Herzl. And we see ourselves as the next link in a chain. And we wonder, will our grandchildren be the link after us? And that's a legitimate story, a legitimate narrative of Jewish life. But it's not the only narrative. There is an alternative narrative, not an alternative rather, but an additional narrative which runs contrapuntally to the first. And it's the narrative of discontinuity. And discontinuity means that there are these moments in our history, and I think we're living through one right now. There are moments in our history when the conditions from the outside or developments from within necessitated a reinterpretation of what it means to be Jewish, a restatement of our basic core values, and a reinvention of our institutions. And at these moments, time after time after time in the history of the Jewish people, we were able to find leaders who had enough creativity to imagine what might happen next and enough courage to realize that what got us here is not going to get us there. Enough courage to realize that it was time for something brand new. And this really is the story of our continuity. Now, here's the irony of this thing. The irony is that when we tell the story of continuity, we point to a set of books. We Jews are big into books. You probably knew that, right? But if you, sorry? Exactly, well said, well said. But if you look at the books of Jewish tradition, they were not written in moments of continuity. Because in moments of continuity, you don't need to write a book. The books of our tradition are all the products of these revolutions, these moments of discontinuity. When somebody needed to put forward a new interpretation and a new understanding and a new reimagination of the mission of the Jewish people, the Torah was put together when the temple was destroyed and we went to Babylon, right? And then the Bible was put together when Alexander the Great conquered the Middle East and taught everybody to speak Greek. And the Talmud is created when the Second Temple is destroyed. And Maimonides writes his Guide for the Perplexed, his Mishneh Torah, when Arabic philosophy begins to erode the foundations of the philosophical foundations of traditional Judaism. And the Baal Shem Tov creates Hasidism at the moment when Eastern European Jewry is suffering a terrible cratering. And Herzl comes with Zionism at the moment when European Jewry, particularly Central and Western European Jewry, realized that anti-Semitism was never going to go away no matter what we did. And over again, these great expressions of what we call tradition were really not expressions of tradition. They were expressions of revolution. It's only in hindsight, when you hold on to them for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 50 generations, that you say, well, that's now a book of tradition. And that bespeaks the creativity of this remarkable people. So my case is that right now you're living through a moment of revolution, which is quite remarkable because it has 3 different layers to it. The first layer to it is 300 years old. 300 years ago, the Jewish people crashed into a new cultural moment called emancipation. Up until then, you had no choice. If you were born a Jew, you lived as a Jew because there was nothing else you could do. They wouldn't let you out of the ghetto. They wouldn't let you live as anything else. And so Jews lived as Jews. And then came emancipation, and Jews were let out of the ghetto and permitted to join Gentile society. And suddenly being Jewish meant making a choice. And making a choice that's completely countercultural to the larger Jewish environment, the larger Gentile, the cultural environment in which we lived. And Jews had to make that choice. And so Judaism had to adjust because it couldn't depend on the idea that Jews were going to be Jewish. Suddenly we had to answer a question, which your grandchildren or children or friends may be asking, which is, why would I choose to be Jewish? Anyone ever been to Prague? Been to Prague? In Prague, there's 5 synagogues in the old city of Prague. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to visit. I recommend it highly. There's 5. One of the synagogues has this enormous collection of Jewish artifacts, Kiddush cups and Torah plates and Seder plates and spice boxes, and it's just a magnificent collection of Jewish cultural artifacts. And I have a friend of mine was our guide. He's a rabbi who lives there. And I said to him, where did these come from? And he said, I'll tell you where they came from. When the Czechs allowed Jews to join Gentile society, so many Jews left Judaism. And families were left with these artifacts they didn't know what to do with. So they brought them to the synagogues of Prague. And if you look at this, you're like, this many communities collapsed. This many Jews gave up their Jewish. What was the old joke? Zayda calls to the young boy to his side and says, Bubala, what are you going to be when you grow up? He says, Zayda, I don't know what I want. This is what I want you to be when you grow up. I want you should be a marine biologist. Zayda, what do you know from marine biology? I want you to put on one of those things, what do you call it, a scuba, and dive to the bottom of New York Harbor and retrieve all the talesim and the tefillin that were thrown there. It's a sad joke. It's a sad joke because he's right. There were so many Jews who came into New York Harbor, saw the Statue of Liberty, and thought liberty from being Jewish. This is emancipation. This was the crisis of modernity. And we haven't resolved this yet because we still have a lot of young Jews asking, why be Jewish? That's the first problem. And the second crisis was the 20th century. I mean, in all of Jewish history, the 20th century is going to go down as one of the top three in terms of crisis. Because look at what happens in the 20th century. You have three crises all at the same time. The first crisis is the Shoah, the Holocaust. And if you look at it from the vast perspective of Jewish history, it's remarkable because the greatest moment of destruction in all of the history of the Jewish people was the destruction of the temple in the first century, year 70. And the Holocaust exceeds it. 6 million Jews. 90% of the rabbis in the world were murdered by the Nazis. 90% of the Jewish books in the world were destroyed by the Nazis. 90% of the Sifrei Torah in the world, except for the ones that we rescued, were destroyed by the Nazis. I mean, you understand what a blow this was to the body of the Jewish people and to its heart. Greatest moment of catastrophe in all of Jewish history. And then, just a few years later, you have the advent of the State of Israel and the ingathering of exiles in Israel. Now, the greatest moment of redemption in all of Jewish history is the Exodus from Egypt. We're about to celebrate it with Pesach. But some ways, the creation of the State of Israel exceeds it. Because through Israel, you saved Jews from Arab countries. Through Israel, you saved all the refugees from Europe. Through Israel, you saved Yemenite Jews. Through Israel, you saved Ethiopian Jews. Through Israel, you saved Russian Jews. I mean, you understand what this means in Jewish history? But now here's the problem. Here's the problem. The Exodus from Egypt and the destruction of the Holy Temple took place 1,500 years apart. The Holocaust and the State of Israel take place within the experience of one generation. How the hell do you make sense of that? Like, what do you do with that? How do you talk about that stuff? How do you talk about that stuff? And then on top of it, you have what we're going through now, which is American democracy. And I know, yes, there's vicious anti-Semitism. I'll talk about that in just a second. But still, I would tell you that no diaspora has ever treated us better than America. None. No diaspora has given us more security, more freedom, more welcome, has invited us to join its conversation than America has. So how do you make sense of all of this? In one generation, in one century. That's the second crisis. And the third crisis is everything that happened after October 7th. I think October 7th is going to be seen as a great historical moment, a great moment of crisis, and what we do with it. Up until October 7th, pretty much everyone in the Jewish world focused on Israel as something we could hold dear. Now the community is deeply divided about our attitudes toward Israel. Up until October 7th, anti-Semitism was socially unacceptable in America. Yes, there were anti-Semites. The kid that I beat up in 4th grade and got sent home, right? Kid called me something. I slugged him. I got sent to the office. My dad had to come and pick me up. He said, "Why are you here?" I told him. He said, "Good, come, we'll go out to breakfast." Right? I mean, but yes, there are anti-Semites, but they were to the margins of American society. I don't know how many of you listen to Brother Tucker Carlson, but the other day he told us that the reason why Trump, who was elected to be an isolationist, decided to invade Iran is because he was influenced by Chabad. Chabad. Did you know that Chabad is a political conspiracy to schlep America into an unwanted war? Did you know that? Those Shabbos candles they give out, the menorahs they give out, the Shabbos dinners on college campuses, the challahs they bake, that's all a front. They're really a secret cabal of Jewish influence that has rooted itself deep in the heart of our government. Did you know that? Now, that attitude could never have been expressed before October 7th without that guy getting thrown off the air. But now, Tucker Carlson, do you know how popular? And then it was repeated by Candace Owens, who has a who's a very interesting human being. Let me just say that. I won't go any farther. And now that whole aspect of the blogosphere believes that this war was a Jewish plot to influence America. I mean, it's the protocols of the elders of Zion all over again. Henry Ford would be proud. Next question. Let me just finish this one point, Rabbi. I'll be right with you. So what I'm suggesting is, what all of this has caused us to do is to take a step back and ask ourselves, what is Jewish life like now? Give me one more second, okay? There's a beautiful statement of this, and it's on the top of the page here. This is a poem written in Hebrew. The translation is by my friend, Rachel Korazim. It's a poem written by a man named Elchanan Nir. And I'll tell you who he is in just a second, but first let's read the poem, okay? Those of you who can read Hebrew, you can read in Hebrew. Those who read English, we'll do that together, right? Akshav anachnu tzrichim Torah chadasha. Now we need a new Torah, he says. He says, Akshav kamo avir linshama anachnu tzrichim Torah chadasha. We breathe. It's like when you're gasping for breath. We need a new Torah, right? We need a new Mishnah, a new Gemara. A new Kabbalah, and a new ascent of the soul is the name of a book. And inside all the brokenness and assault and desolation now, a new Hasidism and a new Zionism. A new Rav Kook and a new Brenner. Brenner was a great Israel Zionist poet and writer. A new Leah Goldberg, another Zionist poet. And a new Yavdea. A new art and new poetry, new literature, new cinema, new old words. And a new ancient souls from the storehouse. And a new love out of terrible weeping, for we were all washed away by the rivers of Re'im and Be'eri. Re'im and Be'eri were the two first communities attacked on October 7th, right? We have no mountain within us, nor other tablets, and no Moses and no strength, and now everything is in our hands. Akshav anachnu shuchim Torah chadasha. Elchanan Nir is a very orthodox rabbi. He's a Rosh Yeshiva in Efrat. He's an editor of an Orthodox newspaper in Israel and a famous poet there. And this was his response to October 7th. Now, you get some liberal rabbi says we need a new Torah. You wonder, what does it mean when an Orthodox rabbi says we need a new Torah? It means we've reached this crisis point where we have to rethink what we are, who we are, where we're going, and what we're doing. We okay? Oh, okay, good. Rabbi, I'm sorry
don't be sorry.
I apologize for interrupting.
I was just curious because you're talking about, after October 7th. So are you trying to say that the violence and the killing unleashed and allowed for the anti-Semitism, or is it, and this is a technical question, is it the genocide, whatever word you want to use to describe what's happened in Gaza afterwards that has now allowed, obviously the crisis.
All of it.
Okay.
I'm just saying that what I'm interested in is how we as a community are absorbing all this, right? First, we had to absorb the horrifying violence of October 7th. We had to absorb the fact that it was a betrayal of the Zionist dream. Remember, right after October 7th, the word that people used to describe that was pogrom. That's such an interesting word, because the purpose of Zionism was to give us a new moment in our history when we wouldn't have pogroms, because we were defenseless in Russia when there were pogroms. And now we're not defenseless anymore. But the idea that somehow history has come down to bite us again, right? And the anti-Semitism and the split in the community, just the whole thing. And there's this sense of Jewish life is going to change. What's Jewish? I don't know about your synagogues. I don't know where. In my synagogue, I have this beautiful suburban synagogue in a lovely suburban neighborhood of LA that's now guarded by an army of guys with very large weapons. Seriously. Now, the beautiful thing in my shul is that these guys are the nicest guys in the world, even with the flak jackets and the weapons on their hips, right? And the radios they carry, right? The radio thing they carry. And when in the morning, when the kids come to school, and my kids come, there's 700-800 kids in our schools. So the kids come, the guards know every kid by name. They know what ball team they root for. They know what they eat for lunch. They know where they've been on the weekend. My grandson loves Mario. Mario's one of the guards, one of the captains of the guards. My grandson, who's 2, will slap Mario high five. Mario will say, "Yo, Leo, you have a good weekend." I mean, the kids love these guys because they're so sweet. But when you step back and you look at it and you say, holy heck, this is what it takes to come to shul, right? You don't pass a guard to go to the mall. You don't pass a guard to go to the theater. You pass. So the question of Akshav anachnu tzruchim Torah chadasha. We're going to have to refigure this. We have to think new about what it means to be Jewish at this moment. But here's and I knew I could depress you. I did. I'll give you the good news. We're good at this. We're good. We're really good at thinking, what are we going to do? Now, if you take a look in our history, I'll try to demonstrate this to you very quickly. It's only going to take 2 or 3 hours, so I'm glad you're here. You go back to the last great catastrophe, the huge catastrophe, right? And that was the destruction of the Holy Temple in the year 70. You remember what happened? Temple was built by Solomon, right? And then it was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 and rebuilt by Ezra in 444. And then remodeled by Herod in about the year 40 BCE. And then in the year 67 after 0, the Jews got tired of Roman oppression because the Romans were just dreadful rulers of Palestine, of Israel. And they rebelled against the Romans. And the Romans, I think the technical word for this in history is freaked out, because the Romans were worried about the Persian Empire that was off to the east. Yes, the Persians have been a problem for a long time. The Persian Empire off to the east. And the Romans were worried that if they lost Jewish Judea, if they lost Jewish Palestine, they would lose the whole Eastern Empire. The Persians would take the whole Eastern Mediterranean. So they had to quell this rebellion. And what they did is they took their most powerful legion, the 10th Legion, out of France, and take their best general, Vespasian, who was a Spanish bullfighter, and they put them on boats and sent them across the Mediterranean, where they landed on the Lebanese coast, and then marched down the coast, turned left to Jaffa, and went up into the hills of Jerusalem. They encircled the city of Jerusalem, broke through its walls on Shvasar B'Tammuz, on the 7th of Tammuz, and on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av. They came to the core of the city. And it's very un-Roman to destroy a temple, right? You destroy the politics of the place, but you don't destroy a holy place. But they wanted to show the Jews that you don't rebel against the emperor, ever. And so they destroyed the Holy Temple of Jerusalem. Now, imagine what that looked like in the eyes of that generation. The temple was, well, everything. The temple was the place where the community gathered. We know this, by the way, because we have now, archaeology has discovered synagogues all over the Middle East and Asia Minor, in southern Turkey. And on the walls of all of those synagogues were painted images of the Temple of Jerusalem. The Temple of Jerusalem was the religious, cultural, political, intellectual focal point of the Jewish people everywhere. And in one afternoon in the summer of the year 70, it's gone. It's just gone. And imagine what that looked like. It's like the heart was ripped out of the middle of the Jewish people. And you can imagine what the response was. How would you respond if you were a Jew of the moment, right? If you saw this, right? You can imagine that there were Jews who said, look, maybe God has rejected us. There was a small community called Christians. They've done well since then. And the Christians, their answer was, you killed God's Messiah. This is your punishment. And I'm sure there's a few Jews who joined up with them. And the Romans said, your God is no God. Our gods are gods. And I'm sure there's Jews who joined them. But what about the Jews who wanted to be Jewish? What do you do? Now, there's no videotape of this. It turns out, I gave you a little bit of the story here. It turns out that one of the great teachers of Judaism, whose name was Yochanan ben Zakkai, saw this coming. He saw this coming because his nephew was the leader of the revolt, and he tried to talk him out of it. So Yochanan ben Zakkai gets himself smuggled out of the city, cuts a separate peace with the Romans, and asks for one thing, a little town on the coast called Yavne, where he could take his students and establish an academy. The last Jedi goes into hiding. And you can imagine when the destruction finally came, that the refugee community came down to Yavne, and they stood in front of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And they must have asked him all the questions of post-Holocaust Judaism. Why did this happen? How did this happen? Right? Does God hate us? Is that why God has broken the covenant and destroyed his city? Why would God let his house and his city and his people be decimated? Why would this happen? And then I guess the question they would really want to ask is, what do we do now? Or can we go on being Jewish now? What do we do now? Now, for just a moment, imagine the options in front of Rabbi Yochanan. What were the options in front of Rabbi Yochanan? He could have said to them, you're right, the Jewish story is over, go home. It's done. God has abrogated the covenant, the temple is gone, God has left the building, literally, right? The temple is gone, go home and do something else with your life. You could have imagined that, right? There were so many Jews, for example, after the Shoah. Remember Madeleine Albright? Anybody remember Madeleine Albright? She was the Secretary of State in the first or the second Clinton administration. And as soon as she became secretary, she made a discovery. She was an Episcopalian her whole life. Her parents were academics from the Czech Republic, from Czechoslovakia. And she made a discovery, which was she's Jewish. And her parents hid it from her. Why? Because they were terrified that it was so dangerous to be a Jew in the world. They never told her that she was a Jew. That happened a lot. That happened a lot. You can imagine in the first century it would have happened as well. That would have been an option. All right, a second option. He would have said, look, Pharaoh was destroyed by God. The Romans will be destroyed by God. We'll sit here and we'll wait till it rains frogs. You could have imagined him saying that, right? We'll wait. And we'll wait. And how long would we have waited? A generation? 2 generations? That would have been the end of it. He chose a third option. He chose a third option. Now, I got to admit to you, I said before, there's no videotape of this scene. Nobody really knows what happened, except me. And I'll tell you how I know. Because he left a record of the conversation, at least one side of the conversation. There's a book in the Talmud, which is like no other book in the Talmud. There's a book of the Talmud that has no argument in it. Now, what Jewish book doesn't have an argument in it? What Jewish meal doesn't have an argument? Good God. So that is obviously a book they wanted you to pay attention to. And it has no halacha in it, no law in it either. It's called Pirkei Avot. Anyone ever study Pirkei Avot? You know what Pirkei Avot is? Pirkei Avot is what the rabbis, what Yochanan told the community that survived the destruction. I gave you a little bit of it. Turn the page over. Look at the second page. This is just the beginning. We can go through the whole book if you want. That'll be the second 2 hours, okay? First of all, Pirkei Avot begins with an introduction. I don't know how many of you have rabbis who like to say, before I give my speech, I have a few things I want to say, right? So it begins with a prologue, which doesn't actually come from Pirkei Avot. It comes from Mishnah Sanhedrin. And it's a remarkable statement from Mishnah Sanhedrin, right? Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelik leolam haba. All Israel has a portion in the world to come. What word is most radical in that sentence? If you know Jews. Kol. Translate?
Everybody.
All. Everybody has a place. Everybody belongs. Everybody is welcome. The temple is gone. The Jerusalem is gone. The priests are gone. The sacrifices are gone. We have to do this together. It doesn't matter who you were before. It doesn't matter whether you were a Zionist or an anti-Zionist, a Democrat or Republican, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, renewal, reconstructionist, gay vase. It doesn't matter. You are welcome here. There's a place for you here. Radical inclusivity, the first principle of how you heal a community after a catastrophe. You're all welcome. There's got to be a place for everybody here. And then he says, okay, so what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? And he gives you the first answer. right? This is Mishnah number 1. Everybody see it? Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses got the Torah in Sinai. He gave it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the guys at the great synagogue. We don't quite know who they were, but anyway. And they taught 3 things: be patient, demonstration and justice, rear disciples, and make a fence around Torah. What's the subject of that sentence? What's the topic of that sentence? What's the word in that sentence that matters? The word is Torah. We don't have a temple anymore. We don't have priests. We don't have a building. We don't have a city. We don't have political hegemony over any square inch of this world. We don't have anything anymore. We have no power in the world anymore. There's only one thing we have left. And what's that? Torah. We have God's word. We have truth. We have spiritual truth. And that is going to sustain us. That's going to sustain us, right? And look at the 3 things that they taught, right? Be patient in the administration of justice. In other words, live this law. Live it. Rear many disciples, which is teach it, okay? And make a fence around it. No, it can't literally mean that, because Jews can't make anything with their hands. They have to hire other people to do that, right? Jewish men think Black & Decker is a law firm. Come on. They think Makita is a sushi restaurant. Come on. Make a fence around it means legislate. Use the law to legislate. In other words, build a life around Torah. Build a life around Torah. Now, how are you going to do that? Comes the next one. Here's the next one. Ready? Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon the righteous was Yochanan ben Zakkai's great-great-great-grandfather. He was one of the last of these guys at the Great Assembly, and he taught something. If you ever went to Jewish summer camp, you know the song, right? Al Shlosha Dvarim Ha'olam Omed. The world stands on 3 things: Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chesed. Torah, worship, and Gemilut Chesed. Now stop for a second. The world stands. These were people that saw a Holocaust in their moment. They saw the temple destroyed, the priests murdered. They saw the streets of Jerusalem flow with blood. They saw the Romans throw the Jews out of Jerusalem. Jerusalem named it the capital of Latina. They really thought their world was destroyed. And by the way, not just metaphorically. The Temple of Jerusalem was built on an outcropping of limestone called Even HaShtiyah, which meant the foundation stone of the universe. When the Romans destroyed it, the way the Romans destroyed it, the temple was made out of limestone faced with marble. If you want to destroy a limestone building, it's really simple. You know how you do it? You build a fire, because a limestone is filled with little bubbles of air. And when you build a fire and get limestone really, really hot, you know what it does? It explodes. It's not that they pulled down the temple. It exploded. And the people of that time thought that Even HaShtiyah, the foundation stone of the universe, exploded with it. In other words, they literally thought their world was knocked off its axis. And then comes Rabbi Yochanan and says, no, ha'olam omed, the world is still okay. And by the way, metaphorically, it works the same way. When we pray, which direction do we typically pray toward? East. What's in east? Jerusalem's in east. And if you're in Jerusalem, which way do you pray? That's a great Jeopardy question. Let's see how much you wagered, Bob. If you're in Jerusalem, where do you face when you pray? Guess. The Temple Mount. The Temple Mount. Now, we face east, right? Which means wherever you're in the world, you are always east. Oriented. East. Oriented. You lose the temple, you suffer from disorientation. Get it? So Yochanan comes along and he says, no. You didn't lose anything. And most of all, they thought they lost God. Because right in the middle of the Holy Temple of Jerusalem was a room. That room was called Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum. In the first temple, the one built by Solomon, that had the Ark of the Covenant, the one that Harrison Ford found in a movie. That sat in the first, but in the second temple, the room was empty. But people at that moment really thought God lived in that room. And nobody went into that room ever except the high priest on Yom Kippur. The holiest man in the community, on the holiest day of the community, of the year, went into the holiest place on earth to beg for the welfare of his people. And before he went in, he would spend a month in meditation and prayer, and then he would go in, and just before he went in, they tied a rope around his leg. In case the poor schnook should die in the middle of the ritual, they could schlep him out. No one would risk his life going in there because God lived in there and it was dangerous. And all of a sudden, the building that held that room, so these people really believed that God left the building, that God left the world. And Rabbi Yochanan comes back and says, no, you have not lost your world and you have not lost your God. All you lost was a building in Jerusalem. And he said, I got to tell you something. Nicht gefährlich. That's Latin for it's not such a, because we have better ways to get to God now. We have 3 ways to get to God. And what are they? Number 1, Torah. Torah means learning. And every Jewish community in the world was always built around learning. What institution provides Torah? What institution provides Torah? A school. But you see, school's the wrong word for it. Because school in English means a place where little kids go. In Jewish communities, it was always called the Beit HaMidrash, which I believe is the name of the institution you're sitting in right now. Beit HaMidrash is not a place for kinderlach, right? It's a place for grown-ups to be. In fact, kids were allowed in, but they were not allowed in the main Beit Midrash until they learned literacy. What they were done, they put them in a room off to the side to learn their Aleph Bet. And the word for room in Hebrew is cheder. You went to cheder to learn Aleph Bet, to learn the alphabet, to learn literacy. Then you were allowed into the Beit Midrash. And the Beit Midrash was a sacred place because it's the place where everybody learned. Tevye, in Fiddler on the Roof, dreams of being a rich man. Why? Because he wants to sit and study holy books 7 hours every day. That would be the sweetest thing of all. In America, you go to school to make a living. In Judaism, you make a living so you can come to school. Right? I have a book. Somebody gave me it. My father's a baker. And one of my grandparents came from Belarus. So they gave me a book. It's a book of Mishnayos, a book of Talmud. And on the flyleaf, it says Mishnah Circle of the Bakers of Bialystok. And then it has a date. Right? So what was it? The bakers, my dad used to go to work 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So everybody had fresh bread, when the bakery opened up at 7, right? The bakers go to work 3 o'clock in the morning. They finished 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Before they went home, they would go to the Beis Midrash and they would learn for an hour. Because that's what made you human. That's what brings God into your life. Learning was a lifelong occupation. That's what this institution is all about. So Torah is now the center of the community. What's the second thing? Avodah, which is now not sacrifice, but verbal prayer. What institution do you do that in? Synagogue, Beit Knesset. So you have a Beit Medrash and you have a Beit Knesset. And now we get to the third one. Gimilut Chesed, kindness. Where do you learn that?
Hopefully at home.
Say it, what?
Hopefully at
home.
home.
Home, exactly right. Now, the Bible has very little to say about home. The Bible's about kings and generals and wars and prophets and sacrifices. You look through the Bible, you don't find a lot of home. Where did home become a central institution of Jewish life? Here. When the temple was destroyed, the rabbis then took the sanctity of temple and put it in the Beit Midrash, the school, put it in the Beit Knesset, the synagogue, and put it in your home. And they took some of the affectations of the temple, some of the gestures of the temple, and they gave them, you know this. I'll tell you how you know this. Friday night, you sit down with your family to a beautiful meal, right? And what's at the middle of your table? A challah. Challah does not mean twisted egg bread. Challah is the name of a sacrifice. You're sitting at your table. So first you bench licht, and you'll bless your kids, right? Your grandkids. Then you make kiddush. Please don't use Manischewitz. We're better than that now, right? And then before you touch the challah, what do? You wash your hands. And you say a bracha, Asher kitshanu mitzvotav etzivanu al netilas yadayim. You're commanded to wash your hands. Where are you commanded to wash your hands? You're not. Who is commanded to wash his hands? The priest offering sacrifices in the holy temple. And then, without speaking, you pick up this $19.95 low gluten, high protein, high fiber pretzel challah baked with Indonesian basil, Belgian chocolate, and sesame seeds harvested from virgins in Venezuela that you bought at the local artisan bakery because it's what everyone buys. You pick up this $19.95 Belgian chocolate Indonesian basil pretzel challah, low gluten, high fiber, and you say, Baruch atah motzi lechem min haaretz, and before you eat it, you do one more thing, which to those of us who are bakers is a shanda. What do? You pour salt all over this $19.95 Belgian chocolate, Indonesian, sea salt from Peru, right? Harvested by children. Don't ask. Why do you put salt on it? Because every sacrifice at the Holy Temple was offered with salt. In other words, what the rabbis did is they restructured. They took the affectations of the Holy Temple and they gave them to all of us. And all of us, right? So you become the high priest, your table becomes an altar, your home becomes the temple, and God lives right here. Look what they did. Now, it's really hard to say because the temple's destruction was a horrifying catastrophe for the Jewish community. But the rabbis said, wait a minute, they said, we didn't lose God, we liberated God. Because you don't have to have Jerusalem to have a Beit Midrash and a Beit Knesset and a Jewish home. You can have that in Denver, Colorado. You can have that in Colorado Springs or Pueblo, or are there Jews in Pueblo? Right? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Verves. I don't know these things. No, you can have it anywhere, and because the rabbis understood that if we were to invest ourselves in the place, we would be destroyed. Eventually, someone would come and destroy us. But if we make this tradition portable, and we talk about a God who's everywhere and not just located in Jerusalem. So what did they do? They created, it's not a new religion, but it's a new version. It's 2.0. And they did it under the pressure of destruction. That's remarkable. That's remarkable. You see how that works? That's just remarkable. Now, here's one more question, and then we'll finish. Another 2 hours, you're almost there. What did God think of this? I mean, after all, God liked living in that building, I would imagine, no? Right? Because he told them to build it. What did God think of this? Well, it turns out there's a story about that in the Talmud, right? So let's take a look at this story, and then we'll stop, okay? We good so far? Everybody okay so far? You having fun? Am I giving you hope? I'm trying. I'm really trying. This is from the Talmud. The Talmud's the great compendium of Jewish wisdom created in the 5th century. It's from Bava Metzia. There's a section of the Talmud about lawsuits, Jews suing Jews. By the way, there's a new Japanese restaurant, kosher Japanese restaurant in my neighborhood called Sosumi. Okay? So Jews suing Jews, called Nezikin, and it was so big, it had so many pages, they had to divide it into 3. Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra. This comes from the middle one. All that's irrelevant, but I thought I would tell you anyway. The story here starts with an irrelevant detail. If he cut the materials of an oven into separate tiles, placing sand beneath each tile, Rabbi Eliezer declared the oven pure, and the majority of the rabbis declared it impure. All right, the year is 120. The scene is Yavne, that town where Yochanan ben Zakkai founded the academy. The rabbis we're talking about are the students of Yochanan ben Zakkai, the guys who smuggled him out of the city. Got it? Right? And they're making the laws of Judaism livable for that moment. You have Jewish towns, and in Jewish towns you have a communal oven. In Spanish it's called a horno, because you can see these in Spanish towns. You have a communal oven. Everyone bakes their bread in the communal oven, and on Shabbos everyone makes their cholent in the communal oven. But they had a problem. A lizard or a snake would find its way into the oven. And now the oven became impure. So what you had to do is cool it off, which took a week. Clean out the lizard, restart the oven, so you don't have fresh bread for 10 days. That's a problem. So there came along a dude named Aknai, who was ingenious, and he invented the world's first self-cleaning oven. This is 2nd century. What he did was, the bottom of the oven was a ceramic plate, and he smashed it, and he put sand in between the fragments of that ceramic plate. And when you start the oven, the sand superheats. So if a lizard walks into the oven, it gets incinerated immediately. Bingo, world's first self-cleaning oven. And he brings the plans for this thing to the academy, and Rabbi Eliezer says, it works. This oven never becomes impure. Mazel tov, you did it. Who is Rabbi Eliezer? He's the Av Beistin. He's the second in command of the academy. Tall, very good-looking man with a long mane of gray hair. Brilliant mind. His father was very rich, so he wore beautiful clothes and beautiful shoes, and he had a mind like a machine. He never forgot anything. He looks at this and says, this fulfills all the requirements. Self-cleaning oven, it's pure. The other rabbis look at this and say, no, there's still a lizard in your oven. You can't use it. Now, typically, when Rabbi Eliezer ruled, everyone followed him because he was that powerful. But this one time, the other rabbi said, no. But how do you make a decision in rabbinic law? You convince people. So on that day, Rabbi Eliezer brought forward every imaginable argument, but the other rabbis wouldn't accept them. He argues and argues and argues, and they won't accept it. They won't accept the din. They won't accept the law. So now he gets incredibly frustrated because he's not used to losing. And he said to them, if the law agrees with me, if the law is like I said it was, you see the tree? You see the tree in the courtyard? Let the carob tree prove it. Then the carob tree jumped 100 cubits into the air. Cubits from your tip of your elbow. It's about 150 feet in the air. Other people say, no, 400 cubits. This tree goes rocketing in the air. Woo! What do you call that? If you can point to a tree and it rockets in the air. It's America's Got Talent. That's what you call it, right? Like Palestine's got. What do you call that? If you can point to a tree and it rockets in the air. You call that a miracle. It's a miracle. He created a miracle. Now, in many religions, doesn't a miracle say God's on your side? Right? Isn't that the way it works? No? Right? And the rabbis say, great miracle, Eliezer. Really cool. No proof can be brought from a tree. Now, there's a reason he said that. I'm going to ask you in a minute why, but watch. He thinks they want a bigger miracle. So he points to the stream that's flowing down the river, down the hill, and he says, if I'm right, if the halakha agrees with me, let the stream of water prove it. And the stream turns around and flows backwards. Pretty cool miracle, especially if you live in a floodplain, right? But the other rabbis say, no proof from a stream. Now stop for a second. Why? Religions accept miracles all the time. Why can't you accept a miracle? You have rabbis deliberating what is the law according to God's will. What is God's will according to the law that we know? And they're deliberating and they're arguing. And he produces a miracle. Doesn't that make him right? All right, come on. This is the audience participation part of our game. Okay, tell me why they wouldn't accept the miracle. Why?
There is in fact places where the stream does flow backward.
But assume for a moment this is a real miracle. They don't argue that it's a miracle. They don't say, oh, we know how you did that, Eliezer. No. They know it's a miracle, but they won't accept a miracle as dispositive in a halakhic debate. Why not? What would you lose if you take the miracle? What would you lose if you accept the miracle as proof? Come on.
The integrity of the text.
The integrity of the text. So instead of reading the text, if I want to prove something to you, I have to read the text and show you that the text says that, right? My interpretation of the text is right. But if I make a tree jump in the air and you go, ooh, okay, no, I guess you're right. It's not just the text that doesn't matter. What doesn't matter?
That's some of the interpretation of text.
Right, the process, the whole ability to, the argument over interpretation. You basically freeze the argument. You freeze the argument, right? Because the miracle now proves that he's right, so you don't have to argue anymore. You don't have to show why you're right. You don't have to bring rationale. You don't have to bring judgment. You don't have to bring example. You don't have to bring anything. You just make a miracle. And by the way, if you want to disprove him, what would you need? A bigger miracle. So now instead of rabbis arguing the rationale, instead of arguing the interpretation of law, instead of arguing the meaning of Torah texts, what do you have? A contest among magicians. I'll make two trees jump in the air. I'll pull a rabbit out of my hat, right? You see what's going on here? So what are they defending? In rejecting his miracle, what are they defending? What are they defending? You have it right.
Yeah. The interpretive and argumentative process.
Say it again?
The interpretive and argumentative process.
Exactly right. Exactly correct. The interpretive and argumentative process. Right? We are debating the meaning of Torah. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And you can't short circuit that with magic tricks. And by the way, listen, if a magic trick is dispositive, if a magic trick proves the point. I mean, it's kind of interesting if somebody ever walked into the American Supreme Court and said, I'll show you that I'm right. You know, but it might help actually. Might actually help, yeah. But if somebody produces this all-encompassing, this incredible miracle, then you got to do everything he says because he's speaking for God, right? In other words, we stop being participants in a rational process and we become subjects to his authority. We become his slaves, right? What if he tells us to kill our children or to go to war or to destroy something that's precious to us? What happened? The whole idea of this tradition is to get out of Egypt. But once you accept a miracle, you're right back in Egypt again. You see? Because he becomes Pharaoh, right? He rules until someone comes up with a bigger miracle. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't understand this, but the other rabbis understood it implicitly, intimately. They're defending a process here. They're defending a process. He gets so angry, there's something called spite. I don't know how many of you live in Jewish families, but in Jewish families, this is not uncommon, right? In Jewish families, this is not uncommon. I'm going to show you that I'm right. I'm going to tear the whole thing down, right? So he says, if I'm right, let the walls of the academy prove it. Like the building's built out of boulders, right? And these boulders start falling in on top of the rabbis, right? Right? Let the walls begin to fall in on the rabbis. And steps up Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua was his opposite. And the irony here is Rabbi Eliezer is this tall, good-looking, very wealthy guy. Rabbi Yoshua was the opposite. Rabbi Yoshua was born with some sort of birth defect, either polio or hunchback or scoliosis, but he was a small, bent-over man. And he was dirt poor, literally, because he had the job. The worst job you could have in that community was to make charcoal. It's like being a chimney sweep in 19th century London, right? So he walked around covered with schmutz. And no one would pay any attention if he was on the street, but once he walked into the academy, he becomes a giant. So Rabbi Yoshua, as it were, steps up and scolds the walls And he says, yo, walls, when scholars are engaged in halakhic dispute, what right do you have to interfere? And the poor walls didn't know what to do, right? The walls didn't fall in on Rabbi Yeshua. They didn't stand upright in deference to Rabbi Eliezer. And thus to this day, they're still leaning over, which, by the way, explains something. If you've ever been in a Jewish building, no Jewish building ever works right. None. Either the microphones don't work, the air conditioning doesn't work, the lighting doesn't work, the doors don't close, the windows don't close. It's not because of bad maintenance or construction. It's out of respect to the two great rabbis of the 2nd century. Now you know. What would be the ultimate miracle? The ultimate miracle is we're trying to figure out what God wants us to do. So bring God into the court to testify, right? So Rabbi Eliezer says, okay, if the halacha agrees with me, let heaven prove it. Whereupon a heavenly voice calls out, why do you dispute with Rabbi Eliezer? In all matters, halacha agrees with him. God comes into the court and says, he's right. Why are you arguing with him? He's right now, and he's always right. Right? This is what Antonin Scalia always wanted to do. He wanted to bring James Madison into the United States Supreme Court, and James Madison would say, he's right. He's always right. It's the ultimate originalist dream. Right? Right? So God shows up. Now that should do it, right? That should be the end of the story, right? Because God shows up like you can't get better than that, except, watch. Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Eliezer's opposite, as it were, stands up, and he quotes a verse from the Torah. 3 words, really. Lo bashamayim hi. It's not in heaven. What did he mean? Here's the whole, I gave you the whole verse here. Do you see the whole verse? You can see this is Deuteronomy 30, which means it's at the very end of the Torah. So you imagine you have a 119-year-old Moses, talking to his people just before his death. And he says to his people, look, kids, remember, these are his grandkids. These are not his kids. His grandkids. This commandment, this mitzvah, this Torah that I've given you is not beyond you. It is not far away. It is not in heaven that you should say, who will go up to the heavens and get it for us, to teach it to us, so we can do it. It's not across the sea that you should say, who can cross to the other side and get it and teach it to us so we can do it. No, it's very near to you. It's in your mouth and in your heart to do it. All right, so when Rabbi Yeshua quotes, he just quotes that one little section, but he's quoting the whole verse. What's not in heaven? What's not in heaven?
God.
What?
God.
No, God's in heaven, but what are they doing here? The law, the Torah, the law. The Torah is not in heaven. Where is it? Look what he says. Where did Moshe tell you it was? Where is it? It's in you. It's in you. You have it now. Moshe gave the Torah to the people and said, it doesn't belong to God anymore. It belongs to you. You have it. So God shows up and says he's right. And Rabbi Yeshua shows up and says, Lo bashamayim. It's not in heaven anymore. What is he effectively saying to God? What is he effectively saying to God? What?
You stay out of this.
Yes, butt out. Buzz off. You gave us the Torah. You gave us intellectual powers. You gave us moral imagination. You gave us conscience. You gave us the interpretive tools, and you gave us the authority to lead this community. Now let us do what we're going to do. Let us do it. Buzz off. Let us do it. Let us do what you told us to do. Now, come on, for just a second, guys, take a breath. Can you imagine the chutzpah of telling God to buzz off? Holy cow. And this is right, a generation after the temple was destroyed, right? But what is he saying? We need to preserve this process. Let us do it. Let us do it, right? So a generation later, there's a Rav named Yirmiyah who says, what did he mean by this? And Rabbi Yirmiyah spells it out. He said, Torah has been given at Sinai, and we don't pay attention to heavenly voices. But really, the most beautiful answer comes the next line. 2 generations later, there's a rabbi named Rabbi Nathan. He's a mystic. Now, you know, in the Bible, Elijah the prophet never died. He goes into heaven in a fiery chariot. And so there's a folklore that Elijah the prophet is in the world doing good things, right? If you're ever driving on an Arizona highway in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and you have a flat tire and you don't have a jack, and you think you're going to die and get eaten by buzzards, and out of nowhere comes a tow truck with a kid with a ponytail and fixes your tire and refuses to take money for it, that was Elijah. You ever get lost in the Port Authority bus station in New York City in the middle of the night and you can't find your bus home again, and comes along a nice policeman and takes you to your bus? That was Elijah. Elijah's in the world doing nice things. The rest of the time, Elijah's in heaven with God. So every Tuesday, Elijah has tea with Rabbi Natan. So one Tuesday, when they're sitting and eating, cookies and drinking tea, Rabbi Natan asks Elijah, "Can I ask you something?" He says, "What did God do at that moment? Did he go and destroy a galaxy or something? How did God respond when Rabbi Yeshua said, 'Buzz off'?" And look at the answer. He laughed with joy and he said, "My children have defeated me. My children have defeated me." What's that mean? Tell me what that means. Come on. Tell me what that means. Tell me what it means. You have kids? No, you have kids? You have kids. Yours are small. You have kids. You have kids. Your kids are big. What happens? Yeah. And they do things that you taught them to do better than you do them. Do you get angry when they do that? When your kid beats you at chess or beats you at basketball? It's a machaya. You said it right the first time. Why is it wonderful?
Feel like you've succeeded
Yeah.
in teaching them.
Yeah. You don't feel defeated, or you do feel defeated, but it's a victory, right? Because they do it better than you did it, right? What did the rabbis do here? They quoted Torah back to God. And God says, "Yep, you did." So look at, and by the metaphor here, the metaphor, you have it exactly right. The metaphor here, you have it exactly right. The metaphor here is a parental metaphor, right? What's the parental metaphor? Right? It's my kid did it better than me. Now go back to what you said a moment ago. It's what? You said something about.
I think the kids have grown up.
That's it. That's so beautifully said. This is a statement of spiritual maturity. So what is the tradition telling you? It's telling you something kind of astonishing, right? Obedience to God is a big value in the Jewish faith, right? But there's one higher than that. And what's higher than that? What's higher than that? Can't see your Sintra.
It's taking Torah and using it, living your life, and actually doing it.
That's beautiful. Yes, that's beautifully said. Beautifully said. Taking it and doing it, making it yours. Spiritual creativity, spiritual independence. In other words, it's saying something really interesting. Obedience is good, but there's something higher than obedience, which is to internalize. You said beautifully, as you internalize it and make it yours, and then make something of it, expand it, do something with it. That's even higher. Moral autonomy or religious autonomy, religious creativity is a higher value than simply religious obedience. That's an incredible statement for a tradition, right? But then what do you see here then? What is the rabbis imagine God giving us permission to build our own religion based on what Torah teaches us, but to go beyond what Torah says into what we think Torah means, right? Oh, and by the way, just in case you didn't see at the end, Rabbi Eliezer was right. So you do sacrifice. Sorry. Yeah, well, that's coming. Yeah, that's coming next. But I want to get into that part. But what's interesting is what's interesting is he was right, which means what? Which means if you want, you're sacrificing certainty for spiritual adulthood. Being an adult means learning to live with ambivalence, right? And ambiguity. You might be wrong. Right? You might be wrong. All of us as grown-ups know we make decisions all the time and we say, I hope I did it right. Hope I did it right. Right? You might be wrong. You might be wrong. But if you want to live with certainty, the only way to live with certainty is to assign somebody who is your Pharaoh and do everything he tells you to do. And now you can live with certainty. Otherwise, if you decide to be a spiritual adult and have the dignity of spiritual adulthood, you have to live with a certain ambiguity that you just might get it wrong. That's what you sacrifice certainty for dignity. That's what the story is telling you. But now let's go back to the beginning. We have always had a talent. This is what this story bespeaks and what the Mishnah, what Pirkei Avot talks about. We've always had a talent for meeting spiritual crises with spiritual creativity and cultural resilience and figuring out what's the next thing to happen. What's the next thing that our community needs? What's the next step in the development of our culture? And that's exactly where we are right now. And you know that we've always been good at this, and there's no reason we shouldn't be good at this again. Right? This I can tell you. The Jewish people are not going to disappear. Not from Denver and not from the world. But the Jewishness that they're going to celebrate 2 generations, my grandchildren's Jewishness, is not going to be the same as my grandfather's Jewishness. Even now, by the way, just as a funny, I work in a synagogue, big suburban California synagogue. 7:30 in the morning, there's a Tai Chi class for the members of our nursery school. All these wonderful women in their Lululemons, right? And they're sitting, there's a social hall, and I had this dream one night. My great grandfather would come back to earth, and he would walk through the halls, and he'd look at this, and he'd say, "Edela, was is this? What is this?" And I'm like, how am I going to explain? 40 young, attractive women in Lululemon doing Tai Chi. So that's like, Zeta, gedavening. They're praying. Epish shuckling. It's how they shuckle. It's how they sway in prayer. And Zeta would say, good, gedavening. Good, they're good. It's good that they're davening. I said, it's okay. It's okay, right? The Judaism of your grandchildren, my grandchildren, is not going to be the same as the Judaism of our grandparents. It never was. This myth that we brought over from the old country, Moses' Judaism, no. It had to change. It has to change. But it's still going to, as this tells us, it's still going to be reflective of the deep values of the tradition. And that's what I want you to, that's what I want you to root for. That's what I want you to feel hopeful about. Okay? And so tonight, I want to give you this little gift. And I know I've been talking now for an hour and a quarter, and you just know that there's a crisis on the horizon. But just for a moment, take a little hope. Take home a little hope. Take home a little Jewish hope and a little Jewish joy. Thanks for listening. Derek.
Friends, let's 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, if folks have some questions, and maybe to invite more voices. Let's take all the questions at once, and then Rabbi Feinstein will make closing remarks.
There we go. What's your?
It's actually not a question. It's
Please.
an illustration of that trend that began so long ago.
Yeah.
My son was in college in his junior year. He and a buddy decided to travel. They find themselves in Rome,
Yeah.
opposite Hadrian's Gate. Hadrian's Gate celebrates the defeat of the Jews and the destruction of the temple.
Right.
And if you've ever heard the opera Nabucco, the lament of the Jewish slaves is so stirring. And I can't even mention without tears coming to my eyes.
Right.
But a shopkeeper comes out and says, "Are you Jewish?" And the two of them think, "Yes." He said, "So am I."
Oh, wow.
And he points to Hadrian's Gate and the beautiful carvings and the beaten down Jews. And he says, "They're gone. The Romans.
Right. We're here.
And we're still here."
Oh, that's lovely. That's very nice. Thank you.
And I thought of that as you were proceeding.
Right.
And it all fits.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right. Take care. Give your baby a hug.
Nobody else has a question, I'll jump in.
Give your baby a hug. Give your.
Go ahead.
No, you go first.
No, mine was just something that as you were describing this constant process of reinvention, one of the things as I was thinking from the beginning about how we need a new Torah is something that I love about Judaism, which is the multiplicity of voices. So in biology, when things replicate, the idea is you
Yeah.
want it to replicate, but not exactly. 'Cause
Yes.
if it does, you'll never have evolution.
Right,
But
right.
you also need many shots on goal because some of those are dead ends. Right? And so that's one of the things I love about Judaism in America is that you do have this broad spectrum of different shots on goal. Which one's going to win? We don't know, but you need those shots. So.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we look at that and we say, we're such a disunified, disparate, diverse community. That's bad. And I think that your observation is very important. I think the diversity is actually quite remarkable, quite good. What I would love to hear, though, and I think all of us probably love to hear this, is that there's just some recognition among all of us that even though we do this differently, we do it value each other, right? I have very Orthodox cousins. My Orthodox cousins, they're wonderful people, and I have a lot of fun spending time with them. And we have the most incredible knockdown, drag out arguments all the time. But then I recognize that my Orthodox cousin, he's a big Chabad guy in New York. No. What's wrong?
Conspiracy.
He's controlling them.
Well, I know that. That I know. But the thing is, he's come to this place where he realizes, I may not do Judaism the way he does in so many different ways, but he respects me for being a serious Jew. And to me, that really is the measure. Dennis Prager, the commentator, once put this out. He says, it's not a question of Orthodox or Reform or religious and non. You're either a serious Jew or you're not a serious Jew. And we can respect each other for serious, right? And that attitude is wonderful. I have ferociously anti-religious friends. My parents built a kibbutz in Israel. When I go visit, these people are like, I got to take off my yarmulke because God forbid they'll kill me. But they're such serious Jews in Israel. They're serious Jews here of every stripe. And you're exactly right. The diversity is important for us because it's a symphony. And I think the symphony is something we present to God. That's the music that God can hear. It's a beautiful statement, Austin. Thank you. Yes, please.
So I don't know that the Jewish angst that I'm feeling, or maybe others are feeling, is that we're afraid that Judaism is going to disappear.
Good.
I would say that if there's an angst right now in the Jewish community, it's that Judaism or Jewish life is going to move in a direction that I don't want it to go in, and then my brand will disappear, right? Like, I don't want to be the Sadducees and the Pharisees are taking over. And so I just wonder.
Would that be so bad?
Well, if you're a Sadducee, it's pretty bad.
No, I don't think so. Again, that's why Kol Yisrael Yesh Lem Chelek Le'olam Haba. All Israel has a place in the world to come is the opening statement of Pirkei Avot. What he meant was, Sadducees, come on in. We'll figure this out. I just want serious Jews to go on living in the world. I'm not disagreeing with you. You're right, of course. I mean, there are some Jews in the world that I have a hard time with, believe me. Right? They're the ones ahead of me in line at the butcher shop, Come on already. Take the lamb chops and get out of my face. But I don't you want there to be a.
Yes, I want there to be multiplicity, but what I don't want is
Yeah.
for one to dominate and make obsolete.
Ah,
And
that's-
when you
yes.
when you love something, then you care deeply about what should goes in.
That's
And I think
beautiful.
That's a crisis.
That's very nice.
That
Yes.
Jewish life disappearing.
Okay. I acknowledge what you said. You're exactly right. Look, what's the old joke? There's two kinds of people, those who think there are two kinds of people and those who don't, right? It's an exclusivist kind of Judaism that says we're right and everyone else is wrong, and we're not going to join the community or play by the community's rules. That's dangerous. That's difficult, right? And then I got to, I love the diversity. I think Austin is right. I love the diversity. And I like to hear, and I try, put it this way. Sometimes I don't love the diversity, but I try to listen to it. I try to really shut up and listen. I know it's hard for you to believe because I've just been talking for 2 hours, but I've tried to be quiet and actually listen to the voices of this community and hear what they're trying to say. Even the people I violently disagree with, I really want to hear what they have to say because I'm listening for their values. And sometimes I can find values we have in common, even with people whose positions I really find difficult. Does that make sense? Does that agree? Is that what you'd say as well? Yeah. Yeah, please, David.
Just give the description of tonight that there was reference made to that holy word from Biddler, tradition.
Yeah.
And tonight, this has been, for me, I hear tradition is not static, it is dynamic.
It's exactly. It's
Yeah.
creative and it's growing. It's organic.
And I love an old question of being cautious about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And it's trying to figure out what is essential to hang on to and what is dirty water.
That's a really, really powerful question. Again, you could see that here in the rabbis, right? They're struggling not to let go of the things that really matter. And that's always going to be a really hard thing, right? There were let's go back to Austin's wonderful biological insight. There were dead ends in the evolution of the Jewish people, right? There were dead ends, right? Sabbateanism was a dead end. Karaites were a dead end. In a certain way, Christianity was a dead end. I mean, not that it didn't flourish. I'm told that it's flourished. It's just that it ended up not being part of us. It ended up taking certain positions and losing some values that we had and taking positions that were outside of our own ken. And so you're exactly right. You never make these decisions lightly. You never make these decisions cavalierly, because you're giving up something that's deeply valuable. But sometimes you got to look. Yochanan ben Zakkai standing on that hillside with those people around him weeping over the temple had to make a decision. And had he said, let's keep doing what we always were doing, we would not have survived. So how do you make that decision? That's a really hard thing. That's why I think your comment before was so wonderful. Your deliberation, it has to be done with deliberation. Not one of us can do it alone. And all of us together, we share our insights, we share our judgment, we share our rationality, we share our creativity, and together as a community, we evolve. And I think that's part of the method for not throwing out babies with bathwater.
I know there's many more questions and comments, but we're going to pause here. I'll even hold my question back. But thank you so much. Let's hear it again for Rabbi Ed Feinstein. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming tonight.
It's wonderful, friends on Zoom and in person, to have multi-generational, cross-ideological, multi-denominational presence here learning together. Again, for those on Zoom who might not have heard it earlier, on March 22nd, Sacred Not Secret, a conversation about death. We're partnering on Temple Emmanuel. Pesach Seder for Disability Justice on April 5th. Rabbi Mike Foyer here from Israel on April 26th. Rabbi Gittler on April 15th. Do you know your topic for that one yet, or is it not public yet?
I was just informed that it's happening
Oh,
today.
okay. All right.
Wait for the next crisis and then we'll decide the.
Great. May we keep learning together and coming together even when we disagree. Have a beautiful night. Thanks for coming. Have a good Pesach.